to Junior Detective Club, a Detective Conan first watch podcast.
A first? Okay.
What do you think about the name, Samuel?
I don't think first watch is a thing. It's not a rewatch, because we're not rewatching it. Like, we didn't grow up watching Detective Conan. This is, I've had friends who've told me about that they grew up watching Detective Conan, but I watched one episode years ago, and we've watched 30 episodes so far, and this is our attempt at, a deep dive into a classic 90s anime.
And I, just did a bit of Googling, and so we know that it started in 1994, when I was 4 years old, and you weren't even born yet.
2 years till the greatest person
arrived on this planet.
You know?
I think there was over 900 episodes of Detective Conan, also known as Case Closed in America.
And many, many movies as well.
Yep, and OVAs. So you have a lot of content for this podcast.
Our intention is to watch through the whole series in order. We realized that we just really loved it and we had a lot to say about it. And we have a lot of very strong opinions about a lot of the tropes that have come up. So it's funny. We're going to talk about it as though we are experienced Conan watchers. Because we've watched, over the last month, we've watched the first 30 episodes.
Yeah.
Or so. And so now we're rewatching those 30 episodes. And then you will get our fresh post-episode reactions from episode 33 on.
My counter-argument to that would be, if there is 900 or something episodes of Conan, are we really knowledgeable enough to make any comments about Conan definitively at this stage? We don't know how the show's going to change around.
That's true. I mean, I've been criticizing the first 30 episodes for being a bit formulaic, where it's like, okay, every episode it's da-da-da, 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 case closed, it's...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And... before we get into that, I think we should give a little background of who we are, why we think we're qualified to talk about this anime. You can go first if you want.
My name is Samuel, and I'm a hopeless weeb. Not really. And I don't think I was ever really insufferable about being a weeb, but I've definitely just been a big weeb. But not an insufferable weeb. I feel like I need to make that distinction. I don't know, I don't have a waifu.
My turn. My name is Janelle. I have watched anime technically since I was a kid, because I watched Sailor Moon. I watched Yu-Gi-Oh! And all those other things that are anime, even though America didn't really define them as anime. Conan speaks to me because I am a huge murder mystery fan. I read Agatha Christie novels as a kid. I love shows like Sherlock, Castle, Criminal Minds. So Samuel, why don't you give us the brief, bare-bones recap of this episode? What was it called again?
The Roller Coaster Murder Case.
Okay, well, just give us your recap.
I'd love to. So, it starts out with a semi-cold open with Munega Doki Doki playing over a murder taking place in a mansion at a party. And then once the theme music fades, we are introduced to Shinichi Kudo, our hero. A brilliant high school teenage detective. He's basically running the show at a crime scene. He has a police officer being his Watson. They nail the guy. They had all the evidence. They nail the guy. Moves on. He goes to school. He's getting lots of love letters. He is establishing that he's a famous detective. We're introduced to his love interest, Ran. She unbelievably punches a concrete pole with her pure rage. She's a karate champion, and he's supposed to take her tomorrow to Fantasyland. Tropical Land, my bad. Tropical Land, a theme park. Yeah, they go to the theme park, and a murder takes place on the roller coaster. Pretty brutal murder taking place on this roller coaster. Shinichi solves the crime at the case. I believe thoroughly he has this murderer dead to rights as well. Then, him and Ran are walking away from the roller coaster, and he sees some shady characters that were on the roller coaster running to a darker part of the theme park, some off-limits area. And Shinichi runs after these shady characters. Ran's shoelace breaks, and she realizes, I feel like this is the last time I'll ever see Shinichi again. Shinichi spies on these people. They're doing something to do with corporate espionage and bribery and evidence. He gets knocked out with a pipe to the back of the head, something I don't like in fiction, because most of the time you'd be out for days or you're just dead, or anyway. They, instead of killing him with a gun or a pipe or whatever, they decide to give him an experimental poison, and it shrinks him down to a child.
And the funny thing is, at the end of that episode, I'll jump to the end really quick, we don't see him become the child in that scene. We go to the credits, and we are shown Shinichi on a brick wall, and then a camera, if there was a camera, pans out, and a little version of him is standing in front of him with the same expression on their face.
And the same outfit.
Yeah, and we see this little kid version of Shinichi walking around with a magnifying glass, wearing Sherlock Holmes outfit, hanging out with Ran. And then we go back to the cutscene, and we see he's turned into a child.
Yeah, some police officers find him.
And so this is our first introduction to Shinichi Kudo. And what's funny about this episode, before I even dive into it, this episode really feels like one of the final episodes in an anime when it starts out.
Yes, and I would actually say that because interestingly enough, there's, like a lot of anime do, the first episode has no intro. They just they might play the opening song, they might not. But it's usually sometimes it's a cold open, sometimes it's a cold open with music. This was a cold open with the intro music playing over it, and I feel like it was Shinichi's origin story, Shinichi Kudo's origin story as this Holmes-esque detective, complete with Inspector Megure being his Watson, like a police inspector being like, but how is this possible?
Yeah, for sure, and he's already at a point in this first episode that he is a respected detective. He's a heartthrob. He gets love letters from girls. He annoys other adults, professional detectives, because he's taking their cases.
And actually, about the opening music and the first case, it's funny, the case before the case of this episode happens, because this was just a quick murder case right at the beginning of the episode to establish him as a detective. I really appreciated how, like, on screen, one man shoots another man with a gun and he dies. Like, right away, they are setting the tone of the anime. They're saying, these are the stakes, this is the level of crime that is occurring.
Yeah. And if I think about the first 30 episodes, the crime has never been some low stakes, like, oh, somebody stole my notebook from school kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's always been like murder, deception, kidnapping. And so I think that, like, it really set the tone for me, because we initially started watching because you described the show to me, and he was supposed to be some kid detective. And so I was like, he seems to be a teenager who knows his shit. Like, he's already, like, the first episode, the first 10, 15 minutes is to establish that he's this, like, really good detective that has done his homework and done his, training and played soccer to improve his physical prowess.
The hilarious thing about me recommending this anime to Janelle is this anime was recommended to me by a friend many years ago, and I didn't really get into it right away. But the way that friend had described it to me was, it's a kid detective and he solves a different case every episode, and it's not like kid stuff. It's like real police cases that this kid is solving, and every episode's a different crime, and the movies are even better because it's like one big long crime. And so I don't know how, but I'd say maybe 4 years ago I'm like, I'm going to start watching this anime, and I started on what bafflingly I took to be episode 1. I don't know how or why I thought this was episode 1. It was clearly in the hundreds, because he didn't even mention being Shinichi.
We are getting ahead of ourselves.
We are getting ahead of ourselves because he's Shinichi. Right now, he's a teenage hotshot detective. He's the top of the world. We actually considered lying to you all in the audience. We considered pretending that we were watching the first 30 episodes fresh.
And we recognize that would be really hard because we do have some overarching questions that we want to ask at every podcast episode. Some of them, like, did Janelle solve the murder? Because she always tries to. I always try to solve it. I'm talking to third person. I always try to solve it in the first 10 minutes.
The number one question that I find... a big reason we started this podcast is because we had a lot to talk about at the end of every episode. And the number one thing I'd bring up at the end of every episode was... Did Shinichi have these people? Did he have the murderer dead to rights? Or was it some ridiculous contrivance where the only reason they go to jail is because they confessed?
Right, because it feels like the fact that, like, almost every criminal confesses sometimes is ridiculous.
What I noticed, though, in this episode, two murderers are arrested, right? The rich old man murderer at the beginning of the episode and the roller coaster murderer near the end of the episode. Both of them, he absolutely had them. There was overwhelming evidence. Professor Megure, right at the beginning, he was saying, like, oh yeah, we know from your doctor that your leg was healed. Oh, and we know you've been, from your financial records, you've been doing shady dealing. So there was evidence. These people only freaked out and or confessed because Shinichi had them.
So if we go back to the beginning of the episode, I will say, it's, like, the first time I watched it, I was like, are we really, is this really the first episode? Because we have a very well-established detective here. Teenager. He's wearing, like, a full suit and bow tie. I think he wears it to be taken seriously. And I think it's for continuity based on our knowledge of the later episodes, because he wears a bow tie always as his character.
Oh, yeah.
It's like his signature look. And he already knows all his stuff. Like, he trained in soccer to get all this physical prowess. He has read all the books. He can, like, hold someone's hand and know if they're a gymnast.
He mostly knew that because he looked up her skirts. 2 upskirts in this episode.
I was going to comment on that. Like, I'm not a fan of perviness in anime. Like, I think it's very gratuitous sometimes.
It's often referred to as fan service.
Yeah, and so I think this was... I had a little respect for it because he's a teenage boy. It's not completely unheard of for a teenage boy to be a perv sometimes, and so it felt right. And I know in preceding episodes it's not a consistent theme, so it felt okay watching it in the greater context of the show.
Yes, it's not a show that's like, okay, well, we need a couple upskirts every episode. We need
some gratuity all the time.
Yeah. Funny enough, at one point, the future members of the Junior Detective Club are seen in this episode, the little kids. And Shinichi, then they're seen in the street learning about Shinichi on a news report. And then they're also seen by Shinichi sneaking into a roller coaster. And as he's going into the roller coaster and the kids are sneaking in, he sees them sneaking in, he says, kids these days. And I'm just like, oh man, that's some cruel foreshadowing there.
Yeah, and I think the show does a really good job of introducing us to every character that we see on a regular basis on the first 30 episodes. So we get Inspector Megure. We get Mori, who is Ran's dad. He's a private detective. We get Ran, his best friend, head of the karate club, who can punch through a pole or high kick like nobody's business.
Yeah,
so we know she can take care of herself.
As a first episode, it does very well for itself to establish every character, including the scientist, Professor Agasa. Professor Agasa.
And he is almost like, well, everyone is a little bit ridiculous in the show. I think he's the most that felt unreal to me because he's a professor who invents things and he, like, crashes into a wall using a jetpack. And he and Shinichi are already keeping secrets because he tells Shinichi, don't tell anybody about this prototype I'm developing. So he's comfortable keeping secrets with Shinichi already.
It's very Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very Doc and Marty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's nice because he reminds me of, like, almost of some villains from, like, 90s cartoons, like, almost like Sonic in a little way, and stuff like that. But he's, like, a friendly, patriarchal figure.
Yeah, friendly Eggman. Yeah, I can get behind that. Yeah.
Yeah. They always have that bald head with the white hair around their ears. Like, that's, like, a signature look, and they have to wear a lab coat.
It's the look.
It's the look. Mm-hmm.
There was actually a really nice shot right after the Ran fist and right before Kids These Days, when it showed the murderer preparing the murder weapon in their home. Mm-hmm. And it was this dark blues and blacks and a full moon through the window. and just coming up from her behind and an eerie rattling percussion, and a single teardrop falls on one of the pearls that she's stringing onto this necklace, which becomes a murder weapon. Spoiler alert. It was. I guess it just really gave me an appreciation for the show as art, and that's on top of how gorgeous all of this hand done 90s animation already is. Like, the clouds and the vistas and the scenes and the settings.
And the very detailed Japanese, like, skylines are always gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I would say it's also... The show does a beautiful job, even in this first episode, of having serious moments. Like, telling you know when the music changes and the lighting changes and the shading changes.
Yeah.
This is a very heavy scene. And then here's some levity. And so it never feels too serious, but it never lets you settle into it being too silly either. Like, it hits a balance in that first episode, which I really appreciate. Another thing I noticed is, like, the musical tones also change. Like, when he solves the crime and, like, you know, the person is confessed and is crying and everyone's, like, having this emotional moment, he's standing there all solemn.
Yeah.
There's that, like, very typical, like, jazz finale tone that comes up, like, when Poirot solves a case or something.
I was just about to say, the other big angle that makes me love this show so much is the jazz. The
And so if we go back to earlier in the episode, Mori's mad that Shinichi's stealing his cases. And Shinichi's like, well, if he was a better detective, maybe that wouldn't be happening.
Pow!
And to give context to what Samuel just did, Ran laughs sarcastically and then punches a pole. As we have mentioned a couple
Shattering
times.
concrete with her bare fist.
Yeah, so she doesn't take kindly to her dad being insulted by Shinichi, but she still stays his friend. And I think another thing that made me feel like this was like the millionth episode in an anime versus the first one is they clearly love each other and they're ready to confess this to each other, and they both do it at some point.
Yeah, like they both have a near-miss love confession, which it's like, wow, normally in a 90s anime, that's reserved for, you know, mid-season, near the end of the first season, or early second season, or however you want to do it, right? That's, you know, like, you can show them, you know, having the fighting, or the you know, the bouts like they had earlier when she ended up kicking him in the face, and then his face ended up in her skirt. So it's assault both ways, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
Their romance is so developed that it does feel like much later in an anime. And that's because we are reaching the end of Shinichi Kudo's story. We're reaching the end of this great hotshot teenage detectives arc. He's peaking. He's in a lot of ways he's like a guy who peaked in high school.
Yeah, well, his end is our beginning of the show, because then he becomes Kid Shinichi, and we see him introduce himself as Conan in, like, the preview episode for the next episode.
Yes, in the sneak peek, they give away that Ran confronts him as a child, and he's like, my name is Conan Edogawa. I'm some other guy. And it's like, oh, man. That's something I'm going to be mad about every time. Just tell Ran. Just tell Ran. Just tell Ran. Like, come on. Tell Ran, tell Mori. There you go.
And what do you want? Because this is like the thought you've been having, but you need to express it a bit more completely for the podcast. What do you want him to tell her?
I want Shinichi to tell Ran and Mori that he is Conan. I want Conan to tell Ran and Mori that he is Shinichi so that they can help him investigate these mysterious men in black with shrinking poison, which, by the way, while he's shrinking, he's going, oh, it feels like my bones are melting, but, like, where does most of him go? Because it feels like my bones are melting, that's not peer-reviewed science.
It's like the opposite of, and I don't like to reference Harry Potter a lot because we don't like transphobes, but in Harry Potter, when they need to rebuild his bones, he can feel them growing when they give him the Skelligro. So that made me think of the opposite of, like, the whatever poison it is, it makes his bones disintegrate or shorten or just become smaller.
I guess I'm just thinking in terms of the law of conservation of mass. Like, he was like 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Maybe at least 5 5. Let's say if him and Ran are both very short. They both look quite tall, especially Ran, and he was taller than her. But anyway. Like, he was taller than the adult detective. Cops are typically tall.
Yeah, so the science does not make sense.
And now he's in child form. He's, what, 2 feet tall? 2.5? Like,
yeah.
He's like,
quite small.
Even compared to the children, he's small. He's smaller than the girl. He's smaller than the... Ayumi.
Yeah.
So he's like 2.5 feet tall.
Yeah, and I think, like, that consistency of, like, the science doesn't make sense, but we're gonna run with it, has happened throughout these 30 episodes with, like, the gadgets that he gets.
He gets gadgets for plot contrivance. And you mentioned
Ayumi, and the trio are Ayumi, Genta, and Mitsuhiko. And Ayumi is, like, you know... The leader. She's very confident. She's like, let's sneak into this roller coaster. Let's do that. So you can tell she's going to be a prominent character, that she's going to be like, they all follow her. The boys follow her everywhere. And... also, they get like, you know, exposed to trauma so quickly. A head flies past her, and it's not going to be the last decapitation thing that happens to her.
I was going to say, I noticed they didn't see it happen. The kids, it flew in the foreground in shadow, and the kids were like, what was that? And, like, they just heard something. So, like, I'm actually monitoring the childhood trauma that's occurring very closely in this show. No, it's important, and I noticed, I'm like, no. Like, those kids easily could have died. Kids don't, if you're a child listening to this podcast, do not sneak into the back end of a roller coaster. You'll get bits of you taken off by the roller coaster.
Or a decapitated head might fly by you.
Yeah, but I was glad. The kids did not see the head. They didn't see bodies or anything at the crime scene, because they were still in the inner workings while Shinichi was looking for the murder weapon.
Yeah, so but it's so interesting because, like, Shinichi is so used to seeing dead bodies, and Ran is just, like...
oh, yeah, she's crying.
Devolving into tears and being really emotional, and he's like, I'm used to this. And it's a like, I think another moment of levity for that was, like, Inspector Meguri is describing the scene with a diagram, and they show a little diagram of the coaster car on the screen with, like, the different people that were in the car from when the crime happened. And the diagram of the guy whose head came off is, like, his head is sort of, like, floating above.
Yeah, it's like boop, bop, boop. It's like a little chibi version of it.
It was a chibi version of him, so it was hilarious and cute, but also decapitation. And I was this is perfect balance of silly and serious that continues to happen in this show.
It's also the right amount of graphic. When he's beheaded, they show it, like, starting to come off in the darkness of the tunnel, but then in the light of day outside the tunnel on the roller coaster, because he's zooming by, they just show, it's a flash of white light. It's like a beam of white light shooting out of his neck stump, which I think is more tasteful than showing, like, the friggin' ham bone cross section.
Yeah, and I think the show has done a good job of not really showing people, like, murdered, because, like, they might show blood on their body, but they're not, like, showing them being stabbed. And that scene reminded me of Kingsman, because whenever they're, like, Samuel L. Jackson in that movie is blowing up people's heads, they blow up rainbow.
Oh yeah, it was like rainbow smoke and sparkles.
Yeah, we don't see their heads splatter everywhere. And so I think it was just kind of like, we can go to a level of gore, but we don't need to go all the way there.
Yeah, but then they did show his bloody severed head, like in the loading area, right? Like where the people get on the roller coaster and the police show up. We do see the blood there.
But we don't see the act happen. We see dead bodies, but we don't see the murder actually really happen.
Here's something that makes no sense to me. They say, okay, so the head is taken off. The guy is sitting up front next to his current girlfriend, and in her purse is found a large knife covered in blood. Now, here's the thing. It was from a row back that the murderer, she was a gymnast, she extends forward, took her necklace off, puts it on the guy's head. There's a hook on the necklace. She hooks it to the roller coaster. That's what took the head off. And allegedly, she put this knife in her friend's, the girlfriend's purse beforehand. But the knife was wrapped in paper towel, and it had some blood on it. And I'm like, where did you get his blood?
It might not have been his blood. It might have just have been blood from something.
So was she only planning on, like, nailing this girl with the initial murder? Did she think they wouldn't DNA the knife? Like, this is the 90s, right?
And if we're poking holes in this crime, I'm going to describe the crime a little bit more. She is a gymnast. She slides out from under the harness of the roller coaster. She sits up sort of between that bar, leans over, and there's a row between them and her victim. She leans over, puts a noose around the guy's neck, and hooks that hook to the railing on the roller coaster, and then sits back in her chair. Like, that is not possible to do without practicing it. How the hell are you supposed to get it on the first try? They're saying, like, oh, she did it in the dark, but it's like, I think I would have fumbled the first time, even if I am a gymnast.
Maybe she rode that roller coaster a bunch from all different seats to figure out what the angles are like, and brought a flashlight with her to see inside the tunnel every time.
But wouldn't people notice she had a flashlight?
I guess, but like if you went to Canada's Wonderland and someone had a flashlight in the tunnel, like, would you say something to them?
No,
after?
I think they just wanted to see what the tunnel looked like.
Yeah, exactly. I would think they were taking a reel. Oh no, this is the 90s. I would think they were taking a picture.
Another thing that is a good hint, there's a girl who kills the guy, and it's her boyfriend, and she uses the amazing quote, "He forsook me," which is hilarious to me. Like, no one else is talking like this, but for a moment, we are in Shakespeare.
If I killed someone, if I committed some heinous murder, you bet your ass I would, like, the arrest, the courtroom, every chance I get where I'm saying words and the media's covering it, it's gonna be the most Shakespearean shit you've ever heard. I'm gonna research Old English in the brief time I have access to information.
So your thought is she was just trying to be dramatic?
When else are you gonna get to say forsook?
Okay, I'll buy that. So one thing I noticed in this watch is that it's a pair of friends, or 4 friends really. There's the couple, so her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend, who they're all friends with in college, and nobody knows that these two have dated in the past. Then their other friend and her. And they have the opportunity to stand closer to this couple because Shinichi and Ran are between them, and they say, no, let's give them space. So she has to lean over Shinichi in order to commit her crime.
But it was the killer who insisted that they not switch places in line.
Yeah, so that was very interesting. So maybe
she practiced that distance.
She practiced that distance.
She practiced that angle.
Maybe she also needed a little distance because then they wouldn't suspect her.
True, if you're right in front of him, you have access.
Yeah, you're more likely to have done it because then you could have reached behind, looped it with your hand, and done that. Yeah. And she might have been seen more easily.
Man, here's my issue, and I'm coming back to the same issue again, but you're practicing roller coaster noose murder, okay?
Yeah.
This is fucking elaborate. But you put a knife in your... Again, where's that blood coming from? You're putting a knife in her... She did not have time in the tunnel to get a knife gooey.
No, she did it way beforehand.
She did it beforehand. She got that... She definitely got it into her friend's bag, like, before they entered the roller coaster line.
So she didn't think about the fact of forensics. She did not think about forensics.
And I only just realized this, like, who has their purse with them on the roller coaster? Because she needed her purse, too, to make the gap behind her. I guess they had less safety in the 90s.
No, you would take a bag on the roller coaster.
No, they make you put all your loose stuff in the cubbies. So it doesn't fly off and kill someone.
I haven't been on a roller coaster in a number of years, so I cannot remember if I've been made to take my bag off, to be honest.
From what I remember, it's like you can keep your phone and wallet in your pocket, but like if you have like a camera on a string, or if you have a bag or a lunch, I feel like you don't take those on the roller coaster. You can't.
We'll have to do some research after this episode to determine that, but that's also another loose end that probably
I chalk it up to 90s
loosey-goosey.
I chalk it up to shoddy 90s carnival safety standards.
True.
Right?
And then if we go back to the first crime of the episode, because this is like a double whammy episode where we get introduced to Shinichi and we say bye to Shinichi. In the first crime, there's like this, we're at a rich guy's party. Somebody's come down and shot this guy in a locked room, and they discover the body later, and they don't know how it's happened, etc. Obviously, so the ultimate just like crime that Shinichi points out is that the guy came from the veranda above, or like the window above, and swung down and landed on the veranda and shot the guy.
Actually, I think it was. He shimmied over. He attached a rope to one balcony, shimmied over across a ledge while holding the rope, and jumped across to the balcony of the room where he commits the murder. Then he swung back to the other room and climbed down or climbed up or climbed down and tugged the rope off.
So we're introduced to a very complicated crime from the beginning to tell us that Shinichi notices details, all these things.
And that he can figure out these crazy, elaborate scenarios.
But what weirds me out is that he can, from his investigation, he could probably estimate the length or the width of the ledge. But the criminal, the one he's just, interrogating, also can tell you how wide this ledge is in centimeters. And I was like, who knows this about their own home?
I figured...
Unless you've done the deduction.
He's a rich guy, and so one of the many day jobs I've had in my life is landscaping, and a lot of the rich old dudes who have the big friggin' houses, they had a hand in designing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that does hold up because my dad designed his own house.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And he would probably be able to say how big this is.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, we buy that, and then we get a flash of Shinichi. Because, he's coming in this suit and this bow tie, and, you can tell he's younger, but not how old he is right away. And then, when the guy's trying to run away, because it's revealed that his broken foot has been a long time healed, he kicks
a globe
at him and yells, "Goal," like a child. We get a glimpse of the fact that he's a kid in that moment, and that he's a soccer player, and that this kicking of the ball is going to come back to haunt us.
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? He solves a lot of cases by kicking things at people, and it's interesting that he yells "goal" in a... It's a thrill for him. It's a game for him. He even says to Ran in that scene where he's holding all the love letters and he's talking to her at school that next day. He's like, "Oh, nothing compares to the thrill of catching a bad guy." And it's man, you're just a kid playing a game.
It's very gleeful.
It's like someone died, man. Someone died.
We also come back to that Bond trope of criminals saying everything in a scene. So if we go to near the end, we have these two mysterious men who are on the coaster. One of them meets up with this guy who looks really nervous, and they're exchanging a case of money. I think it's 100 million yen or something like that.
Yeah.
With this guy, and he said, "Do you have the film?" And he's like, "Is this?" And he's like, "The film of you." Of your crimes.
So two things actually happened. It was just a case of villains having too much dialogue, like Janelle just said. When the extortionist comes to the nervous businessman, he says company director.
Who calls someone company director?
Like if you were extorting a director, would you greet him at the extortion meeting like director?
Yeah, wouldn't you call them by their last name or their name?
Yeah, or Mr.
It was to establish that he's some kind of company director. And then he says exactly, "You mean the video of you selling illegal arms?"
Yes, yeah. You mean the film that proves your company is smuggling illegal arms into the country?
Thank you. Thank you for all these details, but you don't seem natural. And then they knock Shinichi, the other guy knocks Shinichi over the head because he's found him, and he's like, "Well, there's cops everywhere. We can't shoot him. We can't leave too much evidence, so we're going to use our organization's poison that it hasn't been tested on humans yet." So again, we're getting lots and lots of description and details when they could just do things quietly.
Also, I get not shooting him because the police would hear a gunshot, but you can't break a kid's neck, you can't choke a kid out, you can't beat a kid's head in,
I would argue that they don't want to leave any physical evidence.
Okay, yeah, so we're just going to leave behind this unique chemical. Oh no, they said it won't show up on
Yeah, it doesn't show up on police reports. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, a unique poison, that's a much bigger chemtrail than, his head was bashed in with a pipe. Oh god, we must find the owner of a pipe.
Okay, and then as we watch the credits, I forget what the end song is called, but one of the lines is, "Beyond the countless days she's waiting for me." And knowing that Ran ominously was like, "And I thought this was the last time I'd ever see Shinichi again."
Yeah, I'll say this now. I desperately, desperately need them to be happily married one day.
One day, after 900 episodes.
We'll see.
And when at the after credits scene, the police find him and call him little boy, and we see this adorable little boy sit up in Shinichi's clothes, and
it was
we know what's happened to him.
Interestingly enough, so this had a post-credit scene. Every episode has a post-credit scene, which is like, I remember when Kill la Kill started doing that. People were like, "Oh, they're bringing the Marvel tradition to anime. Oh, they're starting this amazing tradition of post-credit scenes in anime." And it's like, man, Case Closed had you. Greatest Detective Conan had you. There was, long before. But what I was going to say was, next episode is so similar to the post-credit scene of this episode that the post-credit scene and the sneak peek bled together in a really jarring way in the very first episode. So it was almost like you couldn't tell that it was an after-credit scene, which was separate from the sneak preview. But later episodes, it's very clear that there is a distinct post-credit scene and a distinct next time on Conan.
Yeah, and we also get a hint that we're supposed to pay attention to for the next case, and this time the hint was Skyscraper, so we'll keep that in mind for the next case. But I think my argument, or my counter to that, is maybe when they aired it originally, they aired them together, these two episodes, as a double whammy.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay, Samuel, so I think we've talked about the episode pretty thoroughly. So why don't we go over these questions you've come up with that we're going to ask at every episode, and some of them might not apply because it's the first one.
Yeah.
But let's go over them.
All right, well, Janelle, do you believe that this person would have been caught had they not confessed both murders?
Both murders. The first guy didn't really confess. Shinichi kicked a ball at him, and we knew he could run.
I actually just remembered. Shinichi threw the globe at him, and the dude swatted it back at Shinichi, and then the dude ran, and then Shinichi kicked it.
Oh, he kicked him and knocked him over, but we saw him run away.
Yeah.
And so he gave himself up, but that wasn't necessarily a confession.
But I think Shinichi had him.
Yeah. I think the girl here... So the girl here has been forsaken, or forsaketh, or whatever term that is.
Suck.
Forsaken. She's been forsaken. I know my grammar. She's been forsaken. She's very emotional. She was crying when she was planning her murder. She was crying during the murder. So I think she was bound to confess on being found out. She wasn't somebody who was a devious person. She was just heartbroken. And so I think she definitely would have confessed when you found her, and she did.
I will say that when the knife was found in her friend's purse, she was like, "Oh, that explains it. You must have killed him." Something a lot like that. And it's like... She was ready to throw this girl under the bus. I don't think there was a confession coming if Shinichi hadn't found her grappling hook necklace and hadn't pointed out her sideways tears and hadn't figured out that she was a gymnast and shit.
Okay, so I guess she was...
Because Megure was going to arrest the girlfriend.
So she was on the brink of it if she had been found out. She was ready to confess.
Like most liars, she was a few pieces of evidence away from really feeling guilty.
And you do need to be a certain level of in a mental break to commit that kind of crime related to love.
Killing someone for revenge for leaving you.
So I think I would say if the pieces hadn't been put together, maybe she would have gotten away with it, but we also would have found out eventually, and if we think about the grand scheme of someone's life. Or, somebody else might have found out she might have killed that person to cover it up. So, who knows? I'd be interested in seeing how that alternate path goes. Alright, the next question is, how traumatic was this episode and for whom?
I'd say this episode was... This was a half a Batman's worth of trauma for Ran. No. We're using Batman's. Sorry, wrong scale. This was... Let's see, a nice colorful metaphor for how much trauma... Because I think Ran got the most trauma this episode because she saw a man get his head removed.
Yeah.
She, at the very least, she saw a man with his head no longer there.
And we're thinking about main character cast trauma. We're not thinking about side characters.
Oh, yeah, because every episode, obviously, the murderer or the victim or a friend of the victim is the most traumatized.
Right.
But
from our main character cast, Rand
the
is
recurring
the most traumatized.
cast.
She's never seen a dead body, and she sort of has this initial trauma of saying, like, oh, I'll never see Shinichi again. So, yeah, I say Rand's the most traumatized.
Yeah. And we'll figure out a trauma scale soon.
Alright, out of 10, how well do you rate the murder or attempt of murder?
The businessman, I rate that out of 10. That's like an 8 out of 10 murder.
Yeah.
Because he used a rope so that he could commit a murder in a locked room.
He pretended he couldn't walk.
Pretended he couldn't walk.
He was pretty devious. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would give the gymnast one, and I think we have to come up with like what the scale means, because like, are we giving 8 daggers or 9 daggers to somebody?
Actually, I started pretty high with an 8. I mean,
Yeah.
the funny thing is they all get caught, so none of them can be a 10 out of 10 murder.
Well, I mean, that's not rated on whether they succeeded. Let's rate it on how crafty they were.
How close they were, or how close they were to getting caught.
How complex they were.
How difficult it was to prove they didn't do it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I would say the second murder was easier to prove than the first.
Yes, especially with that knife, because I'm seriously doubt. I think the knife evidence would have exonerated the girlfriend in court.
Yeah, and I'm sure if they had looked at the knife, they would have been like, well, how did she swing it? How did she cut it? Why doesn't she have any blood on her?
Yeah, Did she have blood
on her?
She definitely did if a guy's head got removed next to her.
But we don't talk about it.
No, we don't talk about it. We don't see it.
That's an interesting missing piece. But the knife was in there as a red herring.
I would say a lot of this is stemming from the fact that these murders happen in a 22, 26 minute time slot.
Yeah.
Right? So there's gonna be a lot of holes, and I guess that's why we're making a podcast.
Yeah.
So Janelle, for either or both of these murders that occurred in the show, what would you have done better?
Okay, for the first one, I would have just let the globe hit me.
Oh yeah, when Shinichi threw it, big time. Yeah.
I would not have jumped out of the wheelchair, even though they knew the doctor knew he was lying.
No, and that's 100% try to retain plausible deniability. It's like never lose face, like double down.
Also,
because otherwise you go to jail for murder.
Also, everyone's gonna be like, "Why is he hitting the guy in the wheelchair?" You're gonna be like, "Oh, how could you do this to me? I can't move," you know? And everybody would be like, "Oh, this guy's so cruel."
Yeah, who let this high school student in here?
To hit people.
To hit an old man.
For the other one, I wouldn't. I guess being a gymnast, she did it that way, and it was like, I just would not have done it that way. I think I would have like offered him a drink and poisoned him or something.
It's hard. Okay, it's like, because how often do you see him, right? Like, maybe
They seem to be college friends, though.
It's weird that she planned such an elaborate roller coaster murder. To me, it seems like when he got with this new squeeze, he was kind of like... Because think about it, the girlfriend didn't even know that he used to date the friend.
Good point. So maybe they like had some distance, and this is the first time they're seeing each other. Yeah. They don't see each other that often.
Yeah, so she's like, I know I'm meeting him at Tropical Land.
And he's not likely to take a drink from me because, like, it would be weird if I handed him a drink because I'm not his girlfriend.
Yeah, can I stab him? No, I don't know if I can.
Well, how would you do that one better?
How would I have done? Okay, how would I have done the old man? Okay, yeah, like I said, I totally agree with you. Double down, save face. The old man should have tried to commit to his lies better. Maybe got a second opinion from a less, just a different doctor, and try to convince that doctor that you really can't walk. So you have a medical trail that makes more sense. Mm-hmm. Of course, all of these are all of these are probably constrained by time, right? Like, when am I going to host this man in my house? When am I going to get a chance to shoot him? Yeah, I would say the old man was a bit done for, given how much evidence they had, the medical evidence and the shady dealings evidence. The roller coaster murder, maybe... Okay, so long as we're doing elaborate gymnastics inside a tunnel, just get a weapon into the girlfriend's hands and have that weapon get into him in a fatal way, and there you go. She's, she'd feel you putting it into her hand. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, the roller coaster makes it harder to do anything really, really complicated that would really frame somebody aside from putting the weapon in their bag. Like, I can't think of another way of doing that. unless you said here. Oh, like there's nothing she can do.
Sneak a
because she's hiding her connection to this guy, so she can't say, "Here's a drink he really likes. You should give it to him." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She can't, here's a snack he really likes.
Here's a cigarette he smokes.
Yeah.
Nothing like that.
Yeah, she can't do any of that because they'd be like, "How do you know that?" So
assuming
this crime isn't that bad.
This crime isn't that bad. Assuming you're the only time you're confirmed that you'll be with him is at this amusement park. Buy snacks for everyone. Try to poison him. I don't know. Yeah. It's funny I say that, but like we don't know where to get poison. Like, okay, do you know where to get do you or I know where or how to get or make a substance that in a drink someone would finish the whole drink without tasting it? Near guaranteed death.
I'd have to Google it.
Yeah. I'd have to Google it or, like, find a drug dealer that can get me cyanide.
One other thing. She has a bottle of something that we see on her desk while she's unstringing the pearls from her necklace to use it as, the noose. Is that her medication? Because she's, she's
depressed.
got mental illness?
I think it was her medication, and I think what she was doing is she was restringing her pearl necklace, adding medication, because she actually had a double row of pearls, because she needed, you need like at least 10
She wasn't
feet.
adding medication though, she was adding pearls.
Were they all pearls?
Yeah, the bottle was just there and she was crying over it, but I think the bottle was to indicate she was mentally unwell.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go back to that shot to really understand it, but or do a little Googling, but yeah, so I think we've covered that episode.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to episode 1 of The Junior Detective Club, a deep dive into a classic 90s anime, and a first watch starting at episode 32, giving you an episode 1 to 30 rewatch, recap, renaissance, reality shift.
We love the alliterations. Have a good day, guys.